We are going to start by talking about the educational projects and then the refugee crisis. And talking about education, yesterday we also, the film, the documentary, and we saw how His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as soon as he arrived from Tibet to India, one of his main commitments was to build a project, an educational project for the young Tibetans and children escaped from Tibet. Often they were orphans with no family, to give them the possibility not only to preserve and study their own culture and language and values, but also to learn about the new world they were approaching and become, like His Holiness often likes to say, citizens of the world. In the documentary yesterday, we also saw the commitment of His Holiness in his love and compassion for all sentient beings, his commitment that brings him to foster what he calls a secular ethics, to foster values that are universal, because love and compassion are indeed universal values that speak throughout the world, not only to a part of the world. And so these are values that go beyond tradition and religion. So the main tool to promote this universal ethics project is indeed education, because education concerns the children of all the world, because they will be what he calls the future citizens of the world, who are aware that at the time there's so many challenges we've seen this morning, the environmental situation, there's also the social situation, the political situations, and so only through education, these children, these young people, will be able to grow with the awareness of being one amongst the 8 billion people in the world, with the awareness that we are all interconnected. We are in this world, we are part of this world, and the solutions of this world can only be global solutions if we all are aware of it. So, thanks to this great message, we are going to start this session today. So I am very, very honored to introduce a dialogue with Jetsun Pema, who is called Amala from the Tibetans. And other than being His Holiness's sister, she devoted most of her life to educating young Tibetans and children, because she has been direct in the Tibetan's Children Village, which is a place where orphans and children going away, escaping Tibet, poorer children, manage to have an education, finding a family, an education, and the values that are deeply rooted in their history and their tradition. She has also carried out very important political roles. She has been part of the expedition sent into Tibet in the 80s, and she has been the first woman in the exiled Tibetan government, where she was Minister of Education. So we are so pleased and honored to have her here with us. With her, Piero Verni will start a conversation. Piero Verni is a very important journalist and writer, and someone who really knows Tibet and the Himalayan region, and is also been president of the Italy-Tibet Association, and has always been at the forefront over the past years in keeping alive the issue of Tibet, the importance, the international importance of the issue of Tibet. So thank you. So I invite on stage Jetsun, Pema and Piero Verni. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming here. For me, it's a great honor to be able to have this conversation with Jetsun Pema. I have the luck of having met her 30 years ago, perhaps, maybe even more. And I consider her to be one of the brightest and most important expressions of the Tibetan world in exile. So before giving the floor to Jetsun Pema, I wanted to give you a short introduction. His Holiness reminded me many times and said it publicly that this is the darkest time in whole of the millenary history of Tibet. However, we need to be aware that within the darkness, there is also a great point of light. And I like to define this some sort of miracle. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the work, the extensive, successful work carried out by refugees guided by His Holiness, therefore maintaining in the dramatic conditions of exile the essential of Tibetan culture, the essential of what has been called the message of the Tibetans. And within this miracle, there is another miracle, which is the miracle of the skill of the Tibetans in exile that brought them to give to children and young Tibetans a possibility to have an education in accordance with their tradition, with their culture, and with their spirituality and religion. This is a privilege that their peers who stayed in the illegally occupied Tibet did not have, as they continue not to have this privilege. So I think this is some kind of miracle indeed. We hear from the media that no one, not even the dearest friends of Tibet, over the years between 1959 and the first years of the 60s, thought that such a miracle could come true. However, it has happened thanks to people such as His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, Jetsun Pema, and so many other Tibetans who truly, truly believed in the possibility to preserve one's soul in exile, and they succeeded in doing so. So for me, within this dark, terrible period for Tibet and its people, this is a source of light. It's a great miracle. It's a source of hope for our Tibetan brothers and sisters, but also for all of us, because the heritage of Tibet, and I always say this as a broken record, does not only belong to the women and men of the roof of the world, but it belongs to the whole of mankind. So now I've spoken too much, and so I would like to ask Jetsun Pema to give us a framework of what your work has been starting from 1964, when you started to take care of Tibetan children. Thank you.
mic. So, good afternoon, everyone. You know, as so many experts spoke this morning, and now I feel a little bit nervous because I'm not an expert. The only thing is that I've spent my life working for the Tibetan children. And as you know, Piero was just explaining about the Tibetan refugees who came into exile when His Holiness left Tibet in 1959. Over 100,000 Tibetans followed him into exile. And during that time, you know, many refugees came, followed him, and then the only kind of work which the Tibetans were given by the government of India at that time was to construct the roads in the mountainous regions of India. And that life was very hard for the Tibetans because they have to live in tents and they had to move. You know, as the road was being built, they had to shift, you know, as it's being made, then to the next place, and then it was very difficult for the children. So His Holiness realized that this was not a life for the children to stay in tents and to keep on moving like that. So His Holiness sent out a few officials of the Tibetan government to go and collect the children. So at that time, that was in 1960, 51 children were brought to Dharamsala by the officials, and then His Holiness took those children and placed them in front of my elder sister, and Siring Dolma. She's the eldest in our family. So His Holiness asked her, take care of these children. And that's how the Tibetan Children's Nursery started. And with 51 children, my sister worked, and then there were many of the children who had left their parents in Tibet. Maybe an uncle or an aunt brought them over the, you know, mountainous, the treacherous kind of a journey into Tibet, into India. And most of the children who came, they were either orphans or semi-orphans. And so that's how the Tibetan Children's Village started. And with 51 children, and then every day there would be 10 or 20 new children coming. And soon there were like 800 children. And then my sister approached the government of India to help us with the building. And then they gave us a 4-roomed old bungalow, which used to be built during the time of the British and which the British people used, army people used for their summer vacation. So this house was requisitioned by the government, and the children were put in in this house. And soon, you know, the house had 4 rooms, and the size would be like, if you make half of this room and then make into 3 rooms, the size would be around, say, 12 feet by 15 feet. And in a room like that, at one time, we had as many as 200 children sleeping. You know, all lined up on the floor, and luckily the room had wooden floor. So in the beginning, it was very difficult. There wasn't enough food, there wasn't enough clothing, and the only thing they had was a roof over their head. But then, thanks to the you know, the warm-heartedness of many voluntary agencies from all over the world, like the Swiss Red Cross, then many countries in Europe, they started to help the Tibetan refugees. And slowly, first we had to take care of the needs of the children, food and clothing, shelter. Then once that was provided, then we had to take care of their education. And to do the education, you know, my sister requested some Tibetan officials and Tibetan, people who knew, who were working in the government to come and become the first teachers in the children's village. And then that's how we started. But then soon the government of India heard that there were so many children being of the refugees being collected, and His Holiness spoke to the then Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and Nehru said, you must have, we will help with schools for Tibetan children because it's very important that you give them a good education. And His Holiness always felt that the first priority was to give the children a good education. And it was suggested at that time by the Prime Minister of India that the medium of instruction for the Tibetan children should be in English rather than in an Indian language, because in India there are many different languages. So when we started the schools, the medium of instruction was in English language. So all the subjects were taught in English language. And that was very difficult for our people because we didn't have trained teachers. But then slowly, the nursery children, they were sent to government sponsored schools, and then they would come to the nursery, and from there all the children above the age of 7 or 8 would be sent to the government aided schools, and they started with 5 schools. But then soon the 5 schools were completely full. So there was not enough space in these 5 schools. So my sister had to start first grade, second grade in the children's village. And then she worked very hard. And it was an exhausting kind of a task for her because she had to depend on so many people, and also there wasn't enough, funds to run the school properly. So anyway, my sister then took ill, and then she had to go for medical treatment in 1963, and then in 1964 she passed away. So she had cancer, and she passed away, unfortunately. And then at that time I had come back after completing my studies, and then His Holiness told me I must take over the work that my sister had started. And so in 1964, when I started to work there, there were almost like 1,000 children, and they were from the age group of, say, 2 years to about 7 years, and some even, some older children who were too old to go to school, but then their parents couldn't look after them. So we had these older children who were like 15, 16, and we would give them some special courses. And then for the little ones, we started with kindergarten, and and each year added 1 class more. And then the children were always pouring into the children's village, and it was really difficult. But then, due to the help that we received from our friends abroad, the school slowly improved, and of course with the help of the government, then the funding came for more buildings, and that was the time when we got the funding for buildings that we started with the idea of having a special home for children, so that the children, because they are away from their parents, and we felt it was so important for the children, not just learning, how to read and write, but the love and affection of the parents. And because the parents were not there, we felt that it was good to build a children's village with homes like they have even in Italy also. You have some SOS children's villages. Then in In Switzerland, they have that, and I have seen this village when I was studying in Switzerland. So we took that model and we built homes for the children where they could be looked after by foster parents, father and mother. But then, unlike the homes in the, in the European children's villages, we had like 25 to 30 children in a home. And it was, of course, crowded, but then at that time, we had no kind of alternative but to have, large families. And anyway, this worked very well. And then at the same time, with the education, we got some trained teachers, and then I came to know some Indian girls who had been trained in Italy under the Maria Montessori method. So they came as volunteers, and as early as 1967, 80, we followed the Montessori system of education for the children in the kindergarten and up to the primary school level. And these two Indian ladies, they worked very hard. They trained our teachers in the children's village, and slowly the school, from primary school, it went to secondary school, then to middle school over the years, and we gave our children an education that was recognized in the country, because then we got affiliated to the Central Board of Secondary Education, and then we also felt that we are educating Tibetan children, and it was necessary that the Tibetan children have a very strong foundation in our own culture, our religion, our way of life, to make Tibetan children as Tibetan as possible. So that was the vision of His Holiness, that these children are the future seeds for Tibet. And then we felt that it was so necessary to bring up these, future seeds of Tibet as Tibetan as possible. So the education that we gave our children, it's a recognized education, a recognized Indian education, but at the same time, an education which was modern, but at the same time, very deeply rooted in our own culture, our religion, our way of life, so that Tibetan children growing up in exile in India can retain their identity. And that identity part, it's not that we are fanatical about being Tibetans. That identity part was very important because of the fact that everything that's dear to the Tibetans, be it our religion, be it our language, be it our way of life, that was completely being destroyed by the Chinese in Tibet. Because during the early 60s and early 60s, they had the Cultural Revolution in Tibet, and they destroyed all the monasteries except for a few. We had like 6,000 monasteries, and out of the 6,000 monasteries, there were only about, just a handful, say about 10 or 12 of the monasteries left. And the monasteries were the centers of education for Tibetans. And that, when that is destroyed, you have destroyed something which is really the soul of the people, Our religion is very important for us. And then on top of that, the Buddhist, the knowledge. And then when the monasteries are destroyed, and then the people are, and it's the Chinese with their guns behind the people, force the people to destroy these monasteries. And some of these monasteries, the walls was, like 2 or 3 feet thick, and they bombarded them. They would use dynamite so that these monasteries are completely destroyed. And when I visited Tibet in 1980, I came across places where the monasteries once stood, you know, a monastery with 7,000 monks in Amdo district, you know, in Chunyi, there's a monastery, and that monastery was completely destroyed. The foundations were even not left, and they had made the mountaintop into fields, and they were growing mustard, you know, and the people who lived there, they told us this was our monastery, and now there's nothing left of the monastery. So that cultural, you know, destruction in Tibet made us more determined to uphold our language, to uphold our way of, you know, living, as well as our religion. And so, thanks to the hard work of His Holiness, all this has been preserved, and the way to preserve this was through education. And that education was so important. And our education for the children, as I said earlier, it started with the kindergarten, then to primary school, middle school, to high school level. And today in Exile, our school has evolved up to the college level. And of course, that took, like we celebrated its 62nd year this year. So over these 62 years, we have, you know, worked very hard to bring this, the school up to a good standard. We have trained our own teachers. We have, now all the schools have teachers that are trained. And today, when you look at the Tibetan children, you visit the Tibetan children and you ask, majority of the people working in the Tibetan children's villages were once the children from the village. And 65% of those people, from the president of the Tibetan children's village, to the teacher, to the cook, to, you know, to all the staff in the children's village, they were once educated in the Tibetan children's village. And that, the education has really, has empowered the people, because it was the vision of His Holiness that you give a good education to our youth, and that education has really made a vast difference to the Tibetan, you know, the Tibetan diaspora. And whenever His Holiness comes and speaks to the children, he always emphasized that in your learning, in your studies, you must go as far as you can. But the most important thing in the end is to be a good human being. So towards that, His Holiness always emphasized that. And because His Holiness emphasized this, we always said in the Tibetan Children's Village, how do you bring up good human beings? And that was a big question for all our educators. How do you bring up, you know, children who will be good human beings? So in that respect, our teachers worked very hard, and we came to the conclusion that one of the most important things is to teach your children through your mother tongue. So in 1986, we started to translate the English textbooks into Tibetan language, and then we started with grade 1, then we went to grade 2, and over the years, up to the primary school level, the education that we give to our children in our schools, it's through the medium of Tibetan language. Because the language is the foundation for any culture, the written and the spoken language. So there was once one learned Lama who came to give a talk to our, you know, young people in Bangalore, who go to the young people who go to attend the Indian colleges, and he was giving a talk, and he mentioned to them, we Tibetans, we have lost our country and we live in exile. But he said, you know, even though we have lost our country, if we can retain our identity with the language, the spoken and the written language, and retain our culture, he says, whether you're in Tibet or not, that makes a lot of difference. You have a part of Tibet with you. And I thought that was so important. And so everywhere now we are emphasizing that Tibetan children must know their language. And I think in the beginning, when we started to teach through the medium of Tibetan language, there were many teachers who felt that this was the wrong thing we are doing. But then when you read, you know, about Mahatma Gandhi's, you know, basic education, he wrote a book for educating the Indian children, and he emphasizes that you teach your children through your own mother tongue, because that's the language they know since childhood, and through that language they will understand. And then our Tibetan teachers, after the first 2-3 years, they realize that teaching the Tibetan children through Tibetan language was a very good method, because they felt that when we were teaching them through English language, they learned by heart, but they couldn't understand what was being taught. But then when you teach them through their own language, they understood. And when you understand what you're learning, you ask more questions. When you ask more questions, then the learning even expands more. So in the Tibetan Children's Village, we have followed this method of, you know, working, emphasizing on Tibetan language, and this has really proved a wonderful way to, as a foundation for our young people. And when I became the Minister for Education, I was just minister for 3 years, because I felt that, you know, my cup of tea is not to be a minister, it was more to be at the grassroots level. But, but anyhow, while I was in the education ministry, I took the liberty of getting in touch with the Indian government and emphasized to them that it was education, it was important to educate our children through the medium of Tibetan language, because there are, you know, there are like 60 Tibetan schools for Tibetan refugees, and under that 60 school, 30 were running under TCV, but then the rest of the school were being run under the guidance of the government of India. And in these schools, you know, what we followed in TCV was not being followed in these Indian government sponsored schools. So when I was in the education ministry, I took this question up to the Indian Ministry of Education, and at that time there was one minister, the education minister was someone who was educated in England, very far-sighted, and I also mentioned that India was signatory to that convention on children, where it says children must be taught through their mother tongue up to the primary school level. So I showed this to him and requested that this be for the Tibetan children. And in, you know, he said, you come back tomorrow, meet with the secretary of the education department, and we will discuss. And in about 3 months, he changed the whole thing. And then all the schools in India, Tibetan schools, they had to follow this a medium of instruction from from English language to Tibetan language in the primary school level. And we were very fortunate in TCV because we got the funding from our friends from Europe and America, where we could translate the books from class 1 till class 5. And when all the schools in, Tibetan schools in India adopted this form of teaching the children, the textbooks were ready. We had already prepared all the textbooks up to the 5th standard level, and that was really a wonderful thing. And that's why today, because of this system, I think it's given a very strong kind of a foundation for our Tibetan children. And whether they're in Europe, or the young Tibetans, whether they're in Europe, in America, scattered all over the world, I think they still feel they're very Tibetan because of the education that has been imparted to them through the vision of His Holiness. And so, that has benefited a great deal. But then at the same time, I also feel that in TCV, the education developed as the children grew, and also because I was not educated as an educationalist. I didn't know anything. So not knowing how to educate the children and having the responsibility, it was a big burden on me. But then, His Holiness was always there to guide me, but at the same time, I've always read books on education, and then I sought the advice of those people who were really in the education field and took their advice, invited them to TCV, showed them around. They would come, and they gave us really important instructions as to how to educate the children. And I think when you can pool together resources, be it, monetary, be it intellectual resource, all that, if you can combine it together and work for the betterment of the children and think of the development for the children, I think the end result is always good. So at the moment, we are proud to say that, where there are Tibetan students who have been educated from the Tibetan Children's Village. We've got doctors, engineers, nurses, cooks and hairdressers and carpenters and all sorts of people within the Tibetan community. And wherever we go, they say that the children from the Tibetan children's villages always feel that they have a big responsibility as a Tibetan. And then even in Switzerland, I was talking to some of our ex-students, and they told me that, we can always point out the TCV students, because whenever there's some work to be done, be it cooking or cleaning when there's a gathering, they're the first ones to come forward and, help wherever it needs to be, whether it's to write something, whether it's to sweep, whatever it is. So I think that way it proves that our efforts have not been in vain. So I'm sorry I spoke a lot.
Well, I think you understand now why, when introducing Jetsun Pema's speech, I talked about a miracle. Everything that Jetsun Pema, if you think that everything was made by a small group of men and women catapulted to the opposite side of the Himalaya by history, with all different economic, political, environmental difficulties that they had to tackle. One of the problems that they had to face, especially in the beginning when the Tibetans arrived in India. They got there immediately before the monsoons, so they were not even used to the climate of India. Well, if this small group of people could do everything that you heard, I think it can only be defined as a miracle. Now, Tibet is renowned in the Western world, at least, for a number of real or alleged supernatural powers that the public considers to be the domain of lamas and big masters. I think there is some truth in that, but what Jetsun Pema showed us, or she talks about, was a true miracle that happened throughout the last 60 years in that great country in Asia, which is India. Just one personal note. The first time I visited the Tibetan children village in Dharamsala was because I had to write an article for an Italian journal, and I was flabbergasted. As Jetsun Pema said, what impressed me was this, which is also the essence of the Dalai Lama's thought, if you will, it's this mixture between loyalty towards your roots, loyalty towards your tradition, which is not closure towards the surroundings, the ability to be loyal to yourself, true to yourself, but at the same time open to the challenges of modern world and the contemporary history. Now it is more well known, but when I got there, it was 1986, 87. What struck me was that you would go to a class where children were being taught classically in Tibetan the history of Tibet, to a class of English, a class of math. So there were elements that creatively put together contemporary life and loyalty to your roots. I think that this is a key element that impress we from the Western world who visit those places. For sure, these elements impressed me, my colleagues, even those who were not so sensitive to the Tibetan cause, but they came back changed after going to Dharamsala and seeing with their eyes what happened to the Tibetan refugees, also because of what they saw in the field of education. I have a question. Jetsun Pema, can you talk about Tibet and the feeling that you had when you went to Tibet for the first time after the Chinese occupation? I think it was 1980. You went there as the head of the third delegation of the Tibetan government in exile. What did you feel when looking at what your country had become?
I returned to Tibet in 1980. His Holiness had, China opened up, and the leader, Deng Xiaoping, he felt that what the Chinese had really done in Tibet was big developments, and he felt sure that, Tibet was liberated and Tibet was developed, and now it was time that he should invite some representatives of His Holiness from India to come and see how Tibet has been improved. But then he really didn't know what the real situation was. So anyway, his invitation came through through my brother, another brother, who went and met Deng Xiaoping in Beijing, And then he came back, this brother came back, he's called Yalutundup. He came back and met His Holiness and informed His Holiness that Deng Xiaoping wants some Tibetan delegations to come to Tibet and to see the situation there. So that's how the first delegation was invited by the Chinese government to go at the end of 1979. And then the first delegation went, they came back. Then the second delegation went also in 1980, and we, the delegation that I led was the educational delegation, and we were 6 people, and we went to Tibet in 1980 in July. And you know, we left from India and went to Hong Kong, and then in Hong Kong we had to wait there for a few days, and then they said, now we will take you to China. You take the train from Hong Kong to Canton, and then we left by train, and the moment we got into the train, they took all our passports. And they took our passports, and we were really so worried, you know. And now we were completely in their hands. Then they took us to Canton, and there we had to wait another 5 days before the permission came from Beijing so that we could travel. And then we went to Beijing, and then in Beijing we had to wait there for almost 2 weeks to get, you know, they said, where do you want to visit in Tibet? So everything, where the places we wanted to visit in Tibet, we had to tell them in Beijing, you know, and work out the itinerary saying on this date we will be in this place, and then we worked out that itinerary for 3 months. So we were in Tibet for 3 months, but everything was worked out in Beijing, and we had to follow that itinerary just as it was prepared from Beijing. And so we left from Beijing, we went to Chengdu, it's called, yes, Chinese town, and then from there we went to the Tibetan areas. And we traveled for 105 days. We went first to His Holiness's birthplace, celebrated his birthday there, and then we met the first Tibetans there. And then at that time, you know, we were quite surprised because everybody was dressed very well. They had lots of food in their house, everything. But then as we came to know the people and they could confide in us, we came to know of the horrible things that had happened to the people. So during those 3 months in Tibet, wherever we went, we always, you know, heard, first of all, the people, as we got more and more insight of Tibet, we realized how poor the people were. And then we were informed that the Chinese came to their houses sometimes 6, 7 times. First they would come, take out, you know, take away all the artifacts, like the statues, the tankas that they have. Then next time they would come, they would take away all the cups and the saucers and, you know. And the next time they came, they would take even the bedding. So everything that the Tibetans owned in their homes were collected by the Chinese and confiscated. So when we were there, people were dressed like, as we got in and into the interior, like people, there was nobody who had a clothing without patches. Everything was patched. They lived in, the food was rationed to them. And at that time, I asked them, 1 month's ration was enough for 2 square meals for 2 weeks. So the food was not enough. Everybody looked terrible. And then when we sat with the people and talked to them, they would be crying and we would be crying. And during those 3 months, we all shed buckets and buckets of tears. So all the things that we saw in Tibet, it was shocking. There wasn't a family who did not lose a son or a father or a brother who was just loaded into trucks and taken away, and the family didn't know. The mother and the sister and children didn't know where their brother or father was being taken away. And sometimes those truckloads of people who were taken away came back. Some of them came back after 5 years or 6 years. And then out of 200 or 300 people that they took away, only about 10 or 12 would be left. The rest had died because they were working on the road construction and they didn't have enough food to eat. And Tibet has never heard of famine. And it was only during, occupation of the people by the Chinese that so many people died of starvation. Why the main thing what they did was try to reverse the growing of crops, because the Chinese don't eat barley. Tibetan basic food is barley. And when the Chinese came, the army came, they needed wheat, because they eat wheat to make their, noodle and things like that. Tibetan basic food is barley. So they stopped the Tibetan people from growing barley. And then when they reversed the crop for 1-2 years, no crop, there was no harvest because the soil didn't support, the growing of wheat, because wheat is usually grown in the lowlands, whereas barley does very well in the highlands. So there was starvation because there wasn't enough grains to feed the people. And then along, excuse me. Then along came the Chinese army. Thousands and hundred thousands of them came into Tibet. And of course, the army had to be fed. And that's how Tibet was completely sort of, crushed. The Tibetans are crushed down. Now today, when you think of the Tibetans, at one time in the 80s, all right, in the 80s, 85, 86, we used to receive like 700 to 1,000 children from Tibet. And today, in the last 4 or 5 years now, in 1 year, we receive like 3 or 4 children. So the borders are completely sealed, and people cannot cross over. And then, of course, being the situation in Nepal, Nepal is completely, sort of, what shall I say, under the influence of the Chinese, and the Nepalese border areas where Tibetans used to cross before, they're now guarded very heavily by the Nepalese, and it's the Nepalese guards that keep in touch with the Chinese guards, and now people cannot come over. So the situation is really bad. And then, of course, in Tibet, after our visit, when we came out of Tibet, we told this story about what we saw. And of course, then the Chinese government also, I think the Chinese leaders in Beijing didn't know the state of the affairs in Tibet. And then they sent this Huyo Bang to, watch out. So we are all getting old and not so sturdy. Yes. So we have to be careful. Anyway, yes. So, you know, they sent this Chinese official to Tibet to have a look at the situation over there. And then I think Hu Youpang, who was a leader of the Chinese who went to Tibet, came back to back to Beijing and gave his report. And then, you know, he said, the Chinese have not done anything to develop Tibet. And Tibet is in a terrible state, and he gave the truth, all right? And I think he was also the leader of some of the dissidents. And then during that time when you had that Tiananmen Square, you know, and then also Hu Yaobang, he passed away, and then things changed. So now today, you know, Tibet is again closed, and we don't have much contact with the Chinese government. And yesterday, you heard, you know, the present situation, how it is. Our speakers told you all about it, and they know this better than me, so I'll stop now.
So you understand that in light of what Jetsun, how important the work of the community of Tibetan refugees is and has been in the past few years. We'll run out of time. I just wanted to extend my deepest thanks to Jetsun Pema and remind her that your work, the work of Your Holiness, the work made by all the community of refugees is a source of inspiration, not only for Tibetans, but I believe also for many of us, well, maybe for all of us who live in this turbulent and dramatic world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jetsun Pema, and thanks to Piero Verni for your touching testimony. I hand over to Filippo Cianna, the president of the Italian Buddhist Union, who will introduce the next speaker. Thank you. The panel is devoted to education and then to refugees. There are many different ways of approaching education, many different ways and paths that allowed to preserve and maintain this lineage, this extraordinary culture. We heard about the commitment of the Tibetan authorities and institutions. We heard about the commitment by many large organizations and institutions, but there's also the commitment of many people who took some projects to their heart. They put their heart and soul and passion into those projects and created extraordinary conditions in order for dozens of children could be educated first and keep the heritage, the education, the language alive. One of these people, and I'm happy to introduce her, so please join me on stage. One of these people I was saying is Kasia Smutniak. I'd like to thank her for being here and for accepting our invitation. Thank you so much. Kasia Smutniak doesn't need much of an introduction. She's very well known. She's an excellent actress. But maybe we don't know her human face that well. She will present it today to us. Kasia is a supporter of a project through the association that she's president of, the Piero Tarricone Onlus Institution. We will hear from her about a project that she created, followed in Mustang. It's a Nepalese region with a Tibetan culture, though. So we're happy to learn about your experience, which is also representative of the help that people like you provided and gave in many areas of India, Nepal, and other areas. We're very curious to learn from you what your personal experience has been as part of your project.
Funziona sì. Buon pomeriggio a tutti, innanzitutto.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting us to participate in this debate or discussion in the last couple of days, focusing and revolving around Tibetan culture, Tibet and its causes. For those of you who doesn't know about Mustang, I'd like to give you a brief introduction of where we are working with Piero Tarricone and Geo Onlus. Mustang is a region located in northeastern Nepal. Geographically speaking, it's in the mountains area of the Himalayas. For centuries, it was isolated from the outer world, and so it preserved its Tibetan culture and roots. And this is probably why it is called like the last Tibet or the reign of law. The first time I went to Mustang, I was counting the years before. Next year, it will be my 20th anniversary. I was lucky enough to get to know Mustang as it was before. And many, many things happened in the past 20 years, major changes that I will present to you later on, because they are also connected with environmental changes that are taking place in that region. But going back to Mustang, as you said before, Mustang is, since 1951, it belongs to Nepal from a geographical viewpoint, but the language and culture are Tibetan. The borders have been opened up to tourism in 1991 officially. Among the first travelers to visit Mustang was Tiziano Terzani, who wrote a beautiful book. So in the beginning, there was a limited number, only 1,500 people per year who could get access to the reign of law. And so that's why that region managed to preserve itself in its quintessence of what probably was Tibet earlier on. But as it is the case with many regions in the world which are remote and isolated and hard to inhabit, this is a very poor region. So the harshness of living in Mustang is the reason why people migrate towards other places like Kathmandu or abroad to the United States or other countries. This causes the culture to migrate. And that's where the idea of my project originated. The Gemi Lozar School resulted from the idea of preserving the Mustang culture. I started from the idea, well, initially, I didn't know what I could do. How did I end up there? I'm Polish, but I have been working in Italy for 20 years. 20 years ago, I went to Mustang for the first time. My idea was just, to discover something new. It was curiosity. I was curious about that culture. And so I left with my partner for Mustang, together with Piero Taricone. As I like to say, we got lost in Mustang. We got lost in that culture, in that people, in those stories, in that land, in those mountains. When traveling back, we sort of dreamt together. It was a kind of daydreaming, and we wanted to do something. And we were wondering what was that something. It wasn't certain at that time, and it was kind of there, suspended. And then life came. My daughter was born a few months later. The idea of going back to Mustang was always there, but she was little. So we waited a few years until my partner passed away. And I went there, and I went back to Mustang by myself with my daughter. That unwritten promise, which probably was not even a promise, it was something that I sort of clung onto at that time. And when I went back to Mustang after a few years with my daughter, I went back to the same family, the same people. We kept in touch over the years with the host family. We kept in touch with them over the years. I got there full of hope. I remember at that time I was very hopeful. I hoped to find a meaning to a tragedy that I could not make sense of. So it's probably normal to look for, a sense when you feel lost completely. And I remember I was in this room, the room of Tenzin's mother, in the Kandan village in southern Mustang. And I asked her, can you tell me what you need most? I was thinking about that promise that was, there somewhere in my mind. And I was there. My daughter fell asleep. She was little. The trip to get there was quite long, and she was tired. And I felt that the moment of truth was sort of coming. I remember that Pema was praying. She took her time, and I was looking forward to that time that was coming. And she said, we don't need anything. And from that time on, it was only then that I started listening. And I started opening my mind and heart to other people's needs and not just my own needs. I also strongly believe that if you decide to devote your time to help others, are often moved by different reasons. Very often we look for meaning, we look for a sign for something. And sometimes this is not the right reason to start a project. it's almost never the right reason to start a project. So 2 years went by after that moment. I never left Mustang. I've always traveled with my daughter, who grew up in the meantime. I wanted to learn more and see without the anxiety, without the need to have to do something. But with this peace of mind, I mainly observed. And so I learned what were probably the main needs in this place. Mustang is a place where, everything is lacking and missing. There is no medical devices. There are no suitable schools. There are a few private schools. Public schools do not teach the Muslim language to the children. They do not teach the Mustang culture as if culture were not a resource. The teachers who are sent to that region are Nepalese. Not only don't they speak the language, but they find it very difficult to blend with the population living in those villages. And so I thought, I could start from scratch. That is, education. Scratch starts from, learning. The idea is not to teach others how to live better. The idea is to give young people and children of that place, give them the instrument to play with the rest of the world on an even ground. And at the same time, to give the people who will interact with these young people in the future to learn, to understand, and also to share their infinite culture. This is the origin of Gemi Solar School. It's unique, at least in Mustang. That school was designed in full alignment with the local architecture, together with Maurizio Sarsini, an architect. We tried to be as green as possible, although green is a buzzword. But I will explain what we mean by green, because there is a smart way to be green and to be environmental friendly. The architect Sarsini knew Mustang very well. He went there. He understood what could be the true needs of the place, and he designed a school called Solar School because it has this specificity, namely having very large glazings, both where the classrooms are located, but also along the corridors. So the sun going through the windows, the warmth is kept there longer, and in the evening, the warmth accumulated during the daytime spreads across the school. This is not a new concept, not at all. But this way of thinking, this way of building and doing things, by minimizing the environmental impact, that is, instead of bringing solar panels, transfer them from China, by the way, of course, taking them there, and maybe after a month they break up, and the people there cannot repair them, or they cannot be repaired. And so purchasing again other panels, so that creates a vicious circle. You can do things in an effective and efficient manner, but more in symphony or in line with the place where you live. When we started the construction of the school in 2012, the construction works finished in 2016. It took a long time because at that time we could not transfer the materials from the Kathmandu Valley to Mustang, except for a couple of months during the year, when the river Kaligandaki is dry. And that's why it took so long. For 15 years approximately, a road is under construction. It's almost finished. Only a few bridges are still under construction. And this road has already changed the landscape from a landscaping viewpoint, but it also has a very strong impact on the region. We are talking about a canyon on the Tibetan plateau that then goes into a canyon. The canyon is so large or so big that it's considered to be the deepest in the world. It's deeper than the Grand Canyon because you cannot even measure its depth. And so building a freeway, actually, or a road going through Mustang is almost crazy. It's a crazy adventure. I saw so many landslides and, so many accidents that are taking place during the construction works in the past 15 years that I can easily tell you that this road for sure will bring the possibility to reach the various villages faster, but the road was not built for the benefit of the people living there, but it was built in order to connect China and India. You can only imagine the environmental impacts that this has. Over the years, I've personally witnessed the moment of when the first car traveled on a stretch of road, or the first bus that went there, the first people walking on the bus and, traveling on that road. Or I saw the last lighting pole being built, kindly offered by the Chinese government for the inhabitants of Lomantang, which is the capital city of Mustang. The poles were so visible, also from a distance. Of course, there was no attention to the landscape. Nobody thought of making it less impactful. It was intentionally made visible to show that the Chinese government is making a big donation, is doing a lot of beneficial things for the people living in the area. I saw trucks and vans coming from the Chinese borders to distribute expired old food or rotten food or alcohol. This is a new way of colonizing territories. It's a new way of submitting the people, giving free food. So these people stop cultivating their land. They lose the knowledge of how to do it. They do not pass down their knowledge to the younger generations. And so they lose their culture and also their identity, the identity of what they did until that moment. We talked about the importance of the Tibetan language. Well, our school, in our school, we have 7 teachers. 4 of them are governmental, because we are half government and half government sponsored and half private school. We had 3 Tibetan teachers, and it was really hard to find Tibetan teachers in a place where there are no schools, and so there are no teachers. We managed to find teachers in refugees camps in Kathmandu, for instance. So our principal of the school is Tibetan. And I also strongly believe that your mother tongue, your native language, is the one that gets directly to your heart and to your mind, and it's easier to learn in your mother tongue. It was extremely hard, but it was the most important thing for us to bring the Tibetan language, the Tibetan culture into our school.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions to ask you, but I will only ask one. So the first trip 20 years ago, the school started 10, 12 years ago. What about the evolutions and the challenges you have to face? You talked about the difficulties of the past. How do you see the future of the school? Also, in the light of these things you were telling me, whatever you told me on the phone the first time we talked, what are you going to do over the next few months? You go there every year, I think, and Mustang. Yes, I go every year, whenever I can, apart from the last 2 years of COVID. And yes, well, challenges and difficulties. Well, initially, I thought it was the money, the problem, the challenge, finding the money. Then, when the money arrived, I thought how stupid I had been, thinking that would have been the real challenge. And the second challenge was organizing the building of a school in such a faraway, remote area. And all of this was possible, not because I did it, but because it was done by the people, by the community of the area. So this would have never been possible in another way. It was only possible because of them. And the person in charge for the foundation, for the construction works in Nepal. She is Kunzum Thakuri. She is from Mustang. She lived 10 years in America. And when we met in Mustang, she was no longer living there. And when we met, when we sat, and this is a women project, it's an all-women project. And when we sat down in front of each other, we didn't know each other, but we really wanted to do stuff, to do something in Mustang. And this something was a school. And she decided to come back and dedicate her life to this project. And she's following the project with the other families of the area. Raju Vista is another friend who made it possible for the school to be built in her village. And she's such an important part of this project. So it would never have been possible by myself. It would have been wrong as well to do this with the idea of going on the other side of the world and sort of doing a project. would have been easier for me doing something in Italy, right? Why did this happen? I don't know. All I know is that when I met these people, I found it so natural to trust them and do a project with them. So the first challenge was the money. Found the money. How do I do this? And then we understood how to do it. We solved this problem. We understood how to find teachers, and every time there was something difficult to do, there was something more that was difficult to do. Now, in the 7th year of the activity of the school, we are now at the point where we are at yet another step. We started with grade 1, and then we added 10, 15 children more every year. We didn't want to do something huge. We just wanted to do something in the best possible way. And so now the greatest challenge was to provide continuity. So if you think about it, we're talking about providing continuity in the way we are living the life now. And this is the most difficult challenge, and trying to involve as many people as possible and trying to share what we've learned, what we have shared with other people, with different projects, and learning this. This is such a huge challenge. It will never be easy to do this. I'm going to ask you one last question. I imagine that over the last few years, there's so many things that have happened. You've started from finding some sense in this, and I'm wondering, is there an anecdote, an episode, a meeting, an encounter? I'm sure you had many, but something that was transformative, something you would like to share with us? Well, I have so many stories to share, but well, maybe what really is close to my heart is that after the summer journey, so in the summer there's monsoon, so it becomes difficult to be there, and sometimes even dangerous with, you know, all the landslides and everything. During one of these journeys with my daughter, who was now a teenager, so it's quite a difficult age for kids, she came with me, and I remember that year she did not want to go. She wanted to go on holiday with her friends. She thought it was really boring to go to Mustang, and I was, you know, she had a boyfriend, and I was thinking, well, maybe it's time for her to leave Mustang out. It's no longer what it was for her when she was small. So during the return journey, which lasted about 16, 18 hours, from Mustang, we got with a bus to a jeep. So it's always a trip from hell. So when we got to the Kathmandu Valley, and the climate was starting to get from dry and cool, from dry and cool to hot and sticky, I started feeling guilty that I was taking my daughter to Mustang, and for her, these holidays probably one day she's going to tell me, instead of, making me do a normal life, you force me to go to Masang. So, and one of these days, we stopped. We sat on the side of the road to rest, to have a cup of tea. And while I was drinking this cup of tea from a small guest house that was there with chickens and dogs, and it was starting to rain, I thought, oh, Jesus, we have the night ahead of us. How are we going to do? My daughter came to me and said, Mom, the day when you're going to be too old to come here, I will take you. Thank you, Kasia. Thank you so much for telling us your story. Thanking you for sharing such personal memories. I know that last night you had a long talk with Pema, so stay tuned. Something can happen. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to have a 20 minutes break. And then the last session, please stay, because we're going to have two wonderful contributions from another way of talking about education, so say learning. And thank you so much to Geshe Negi and Podang Foundation, and then the wonderful experience of Debbie Carrani. Thank you.
So we continue talking about education. As we said yesterday, these 2 days are the result of the cooperation with many institutions. Can you please inform people outside the room that we are starting again? We have actually started again. So as I was saying, these 2 days are the result also of the cooperation with several different institutions. One of them, which has not been introduced yet, is in a cooperation for a long time, which was also one of the results of the recent visit by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So Tenzin Sewo, Tenzila, please can join me on stage. Tenzin Sewo is the executive director of the Unimproda Foundation. The foundation was set up by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He will talk about the activities of the foundation. Among the purposes of the foundation, there is certainly the purpose of taking care of education. So we thought that together with Tenzin Sewo, we should also invite the representative of this extraordinary educational project led by Geshe Negi, and then Alessandra and Leonora are also invited to participate in this panel. I will introduce you later on, because I want to hand over to Tenzin Sewo, whom I'd like to thank dearly. He is secretary of the Garden Prondang Foundation, headquartered in Zurich. Thank you for being with us, also because I know it was not easy to come here.
I don't understand very well Italian, but what you said, no, I understand it. I understood the gist of it. Thank you very much. Distinguished guests and participants of this conference, Honorable Gesù Pema, cari amici del Tibet e di Sua Santità il Dalai Lama.
Dear friends of Tibet and of the Dalai Lama.
Conference on Tibet, and it is also I'm filled with gratitude to be able to represent and to speak on behalf of the Gande Podang Foundation of the Dalai Lama. The topics you have covered yesterday and today are all very dear to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We have personalities here gathered who for sure can much better explain the thoughts and visions of His Holiness than myself. 7 years back, in February 2015, His Holiness established the Gandem Potang Foundation of the Dalai Lama in Switzerland. It is therefore still a young foundation. It's presided by His Holiness, and as the founder and its chairman. The foundation is based in the lovely city of Zurich, and it is the sole operating foundation outside of India, which is chaired by His Holiness. I'm also very happy that Mr. Tempa Tseringla is here, and you have also met Mr. Kersen Gyaltsen. Both are members of the board of directors since the beginning of the foundation. I myself, I served the foundation, as Filippo said, as the executive director, just doing the day-to-day management and planning and executing the projects and activities in close consultation with the board. The objectives of the foundation are entirely in line with His Holiness' life commitments towards promoting basic human values, the promotion of interreligious harmony, the preservation of the unique, rich Tibetan Buddhist culture, the protection of Tibet's ecology, and also the revival of the ancient Indian knowledge. We as the foundation, we also do some charity work, especially for people, for brothers and sisters who are not in a, position like we are, irrespective of nationality, of religion, of origin, especially for the people who are ravaged by conflict, famine, and natural disaster. It is therefore, I think, a very essential and valuable vehicle, this foundation, in a world which is so globalized, interconnected, and so fast, that we offer kind of a channel for all the supporters and sympathizers with His Holiness to be part of this, I would say, revolution. Through this support, you can build kind of a dedicated relationship with the values enshrined in His Holiness' life commitments. And I think through His Holiness' generosity and the constant support He's giving for the foundation, He makes once more evident that these values are crucial for a more peaceful world and a brighter tomorrow for the underprivileged. By establishing this foundation and focusing on the promotion of these fundamental human values, His Holiness proves his confidence and belief in the goodness of humankind. It is in general not very interesting when I just now read out the activities like an annual report, but I think some activities and some projects reflect the themes and subjects you have covered here yesterday and today. So what I want to share with you are just some highlights of the foundation's work. For example, we have in the past organized and sponsored interreligious events. This is very important because His Holiness, as a Buddhist monk, is of the opinion that the religious harmony is very, very important. And such interfaith events is one aspect of this promotion of religious harmony, where His Holiness meets other fellow leaders of religions, religious traditions, and they pray together. This is a public showcase of this religious harmony, because he always says that all religions carry the same message of love, respect, compassion, and warm-heartedness. In 2019, the foundation took over a prestigious scholarship program from another organization connected to His Holiness. With this program, we annually spend around $250,000 for 20 to 40 Tibetan students who are enrolled in a master's or PhD program in the West. For example, this year we had 45 Tibetan students who studied in the fields of microbiology, aerospace engineering, anthropology, etc. His Holiness often talks about three categories concerning Tibetan Buddhism. One is science, one philosophy, and one religion. Where religion is a matter of Buddhist practitioners, for Buddhist practitioners, Buddhist science and philosophy provide interesting insights not only for the academic world, but for the audience at large. Our foundation, right from the beginning, helped with the translation and the publication of the book called Science and Philosophy in the Indian Buddhist Classics. It is a compendium of all significant Buddhist texts containing valuable scientific and philosophical explorations, explanations, and discussions. For example, how does Buddhist science define time? What about the birth process, the brain in the Buddhist medical texts, the relation of body and mind, and so forth? The Italian publications are out. Volume 1 is out, and Volume 2 is coming out soon. The publisher is Ubaldini. One of the more significant projects we are engaged in is in the context of promotion of basic human values. It is an honor to be here with Professor Negi and fellow teammates. In the past 6 years, we have supported establishing the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at the Emory University in Atlanta, USA. As we will see later, the center plays a leading role in His Holiness' vision of educating the heart. The so-called product of many years of research and development is the curriculum Social, Emotional, and Ethical Learning, in short, C-Learning. Having Professor Negi here, the director of the Compassion Center, is a delight. I cannot elaborate on the richness, technicalities, and finesse of C-Learning, needing more expert knowledge. But I have experience in my meetings with people from the education field, is it professionally or privately, that there's a kind of moral or ethical illness in the school system. Often societal pressure and expectations from parents, from the close community, the economy, and other stakeholders leave less room for students for their emotional and ethical health. I came this morning by train from Zurich to Milan, and I bought the Sunday paper Sonntagszeitung, which is a major Sunday paper in Switzerland. The headline was "The Forgotten Girls." The article reports the findings of a large-scale study about violence and crime at school. It found out that the crime and violence rate had increased enormously recently, especially against girls. The researcher tries to explain the factors for the increase, arguing that migration or the divergent cultural background are likely causes. That definitely might be. But when I read the article, I felt very strongly that this cannot only be the reason for such an increase in crime and violence against other students. We will learn later that programs like C-Learning will address the root of the problem more deeply. It is His Holiness' conviction that there is a common ground beyond these secondary differences. Instead of teaching values based on secondary differences such as origin, religion, and skin color, we should focus on what we have in common. A paradigm change is necessary. We need to educate the brain and the heart. I want to take less time since we have Professor Negi and the Italian team of C-Learning present who have much deeper knowledge of this topic. If you are interested in the foundation, as it is often in life, the coincidence wants that we have just published the Italian version of our website. It's www.dalailamafoundation.org/EIT for Italy. You will find much more information about our foundation on the website. I will be around here a little bit, and if you have any questions or comments, please, I'm very happy to talk to you. Once again, thank you very much, Filippo. Thank you very much to all the partners of this important conference, and grazie per l'attenzione e l'interesse.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Come vi dicevo, proseguiamo.
As I was saying before, we're going to continue talking about education. We're getting into the heart of educational systems, and I am so pleased that Geshe Negi came from the United States. He really came on purpose for this event, so I really thank him. Geshe Lobsang Tenzin Negi is a co-founder of the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at the Emory University, and is also pedagogy professor in this university, and he's also the person who responded to the appeal of His Holiness and took charge to inspire this project called Seal Learning. So I'm just going to give the floor to him. Seal Learning is luckily expanding throughout the world. Even Italy has the committee, so I would like to say hello to Eleonora Dolara and Alessandra Pollina. So my young friends, and just joking, just to say that we've been knowing each other for a very long time. Thank you for being here, and the floor is to you, Geshe Negi. Thank you.
Thank you, Filippo, for this kind introduction and for having me here at this wonderful conference. At the outset, I would like to pay my sincere homage to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is the source and the vision for the program that I will be speaking about, the Seal Learning, Social, Emotional, and Ethical Learning. I would like to also acknowledge and pay my respect to Her Honorable Jetsun Pema and the Tempasering, as well as other participants here. This is really an honor for me to present this really important educational program to you all. Let me begin by quoting His Holiness from the Ethics for the New Millennium book that he wrote at the turn of this century, in which His Holiness says that a revolution is called for, certainly, but not a political, an economic, or even the technical revolution. We have had enough experience of these during the past century to know that a purely external approach will not suffice. What I propose is a spiritual revolution. So here, the keywords, a purely external approach will not suffice, but we need a spiritual revolution. Now, I'm sure you all follow His Holiness's teachings and speeches to know that for the last 4 decades or so, His Holiness has given a very deep, consideration to what is missing in education. And that is why that the title of this presentation I wanted to have addressing a critical need in education. Now, the modern education, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, that
has excessively placed importance on material development and has neglected the education of inner values. And that neglect of the education, as you heard in the last this 2-day conference, that the pervading issues, the problems that we see, whether it is the polarizing ideologies that we see, that is really spreading, or the conflicts, the wars, what's happening in Ukraine and many other parts of the world, climate changes causing enormous forest fires. In the United States alone, just last year, there were millions of acres were burned, forests were burned in the forest fires. And of course, the flooding and so forth that we heard today. So without kind of going into this, because this has already been addressed in the past 2 days, I want to kind of bring our focus to also the cost of this neglect in education. Education of basic human values like kindness, compassion, the skills like social, emotional skills, and ethical discernment. In many ways are reflected in the pervading problems that we see, for example, in the United States, it's around the world. 1.3 billion people around the world live in this poverty, multidimensional poverty. We know that the political polarization is getting worse in many countries, in the United States and other parts of the country. And in many ways, these do reflect a certain neglect on these inner values. And it's affecting our children. That if you think about in the United States, for example, 1 in 6 youth in age 6 and 17 has mental health disorders each year. 50% of lifetime mental illnesses, they begin by the age 14. And then as you can see that how, that once you have a mental illness, it's recurs, that like the depression tend to recur quite, frequently throughout the life if it is not properly treated. Second leading cause of death in US among the children aged 10 and 14 is suicide. And so, this goes on and on. For example, I was just reading a couple of days ago, for with the climate change, all the flooding and the forest fires and the climate migrations that we are seeing, you can see that it's a kind of the really leading problem, and in terms of the mental health, as I mentioned, it begins the huge percentage by age 14, but continues in college. You can see, how more than 60% of college students meet this criteria, of at least having one problem. 1 in 5 college students reported having suicidal thoughts. 64% of college dropouts cite mental health reasons for leaving college. So it's a real, issue that is facing our young, but they will become adults and the leaders, parents, teachers in the community, and this will have a real impact. So, speaking of the quality of life, instead of thinking just purely on the material basis, as His Holiness says, that is part of the reason, the excessive focus on material development and the lack of focus on inner development. In fact, the United Nations in 2011, they adopted a charter, in which they propose that we need to kind of rethink, reimagine the progress or the development, in which they said that it needs to be, guided by how we measure happiness, so happiness towards a holistic approach to development. Happiness of the population needs to be taken into consideration, or the good quality of life. Happiness, by happiness I don't mean just feeling high, but rather the good quality of life. With this adoption of the resolution at the UN, they have been producing reports every year, happiness report. In 2017, for example, they produced their report based on a large-scale study done in 4 countries: United States, United Kingdom, Indonesia, and Australia. And this study was about assessing the quality of life. In other words, how happy the population in these countries was. What they found, and also looking into what are the predictors for happiness or the suffering, they found that in the adulthood, the quality of life very much is predicted by mental health. Of course, if you have suicide, sort of suicidal thoughts, depression, anxiety, loneliness, burnout, these are major issues that's affecting today. How could you, say that an individual would be flourishing in such, emotional struggles that they're going through? And then when they trace back what predicts mental health problems in adulthood, they found that childhood emotional problems, and the behavior, these are the greatest predictors of adulthood mental health problems. And when you look into the childhood mental health problems, one of the greatest predictors is parents' mental health, and particularly of the mother. And the secondly, the social ambience of primary and secondary school. School culture makes a huge difference. And so in their report, they concluded that which school a child went to, both primary and secondary, predicts as much of how the child develops as all the characteristics we can measure of the mother and father. This is true of what determines the child's emotional health, their behavior, and academic achievement. The implications for policy are momentous. So that's what the report points to. And one of the architects of this report is Richard Laird, who is at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and he has been with His Holiness on various panels, and he is well familiar with His Holiness's thought. In an article where they emphasize the need for happiness, that this happiness ethics, or otherwise called also as secular ethics, he says that, so we need a new ethics which incorporates the best values to be found in all religions, but which is equally convincing to people with no religious faith at all, as the Dalai Lama says, or put it, and he quotes, "In today's secular and multicultural societies, any religion-based answer to the problem of neglect of inner values could not be universal, and so would be inadequate. We need an approach to ethics that can be equally acceptable to those with religious faith and those without. We need a secular ethics." So secular is not a religious or against religion, but rather a universal approach that respects the religion, but also the aspirations of those who have no religion. This approach to learning and to ensure the lasting flourishing and the survival of humanity is really presented in His Holiness's books, as I mentioned, Ethics for the New Millennium, written at the turn of the century, The Beyond Religion. Here, His Holiness brings the very heart and wealth of Tibetan civilization or the culture, that we heard earlier, that how Tibet is the source of these fresh waters that, serve billions of people. without fresh waters, without clean water, humanity cannot survive. But His Holiness also says that without love and compassion, humanity cannot survive, as he says that love and compassion are not luxuries, these are necessities without which humanity cannot survive. And I find this, it's incredible that how His Holiness, is concerned about the whole world, as Tenzin mentioned. The first of his 4 commitments is as being one of the members of the 7+ billion people on this earth. It's about promoting basic human values, because basic human values are what are universal values, and these are the values that will ensure our continued survival and well-being. And so when 2015, His Holiness the Dalai Lama asked us at Emory University to develop a framework and some sample curricula based on his teachings. We at Emory University, we assembled some scholars, some teachers, and we created a framework for what at the time called secular ethics in education. And the content for those, the framework and the sample curricula, it was drawn from His Holiness's writings, primarily these 2 books, but also other speeches and writings. The structure for the secular ethics, now referred to as C-learning, is based on Daniel Goleman's triple focus. Daniel Goleman, as you know, that he is one of the pioneers of a field called social emotional learning, and he has written a number of books like the emotional intelligence, social intelligence, ecological intelligence, and he has written books like A Force for Good, and Ethics for the Whole World, basically presenting His Holiness's vision for the ethics, an ethical approach. So we took the structure from a very small book that's called Triple Focus, A New Approach to Education. And triple focus refers to inner focus, other focus, and outer focus. Inner focus has to do primarily with self-awareness and managing our own inner life, our emotions. Other focus refers to our interpersonal awareness, awareness of others, that we are social beings as we live with others, our empathy, perspective taking, and so forth. Without being attuned to those around us, we would not be able to interact meaningfully with others. And then the outer focus has to do with the systems thinking, as earlier Gompula and others presented, that how even thinking about solutions to the economy, whether to introducing the products with barley, you have to think in a system, context without which a narrow approach can actually lead to unwanted side effects and so forth. So this was what the kind of the structure. And in 2016, actually, together with Daniel Goleman and other advisors for our effort, we met with His Holiness, and at the meeting, Daniel Goleman presented to His Holiness this question: would it be okay to refer to this as social, emotional, and ethical learning? As he was the architect, one of the architects of social, emotional learning, here we are bringing also ethical dimension. So he asked His Holiness how important it is to just refer to as secular ethics versus social, emotional, ethical learning. For him, for Daniel Goleman, the concern was that particularly in America, I think to a large part in the West, the secular term secular, it connotes a certain kind of meaning. Particularly in America, there is a sense of a-religious, against religion, and that can certainly make it harder for schools to adopt a program that is seen as against religion. And His Holiness at that meeting conveyed that, there's nothing in name. What is important is the content. So we can call this social, emotional, and ethical learning. And that is the genesis of the name for this program, otherwise, known as the secular ethics. Now, secular ethics is a comprehensive program. It has a framework and also a number of curricula that we have developed, but it is to teach awareness, compassion, and ethical engagement to children, in educational setting across the globe. So it is intended for a global kind of audience, global. Now, in this framework, and we would not have much time to go, unfortunately, today, but you can see here, those of you who are familiar with the Buddhist teachings, you can see the components here. Awareness, three kind of the dimensions, and domains. The domains are personal, social, and systems, but the really, what is that engine that creates the change on the personal level, on the interpersonal level, and in the communal or the system level? These are the two main parts, awareness and compassion. In the Buddhist term, you can say this wisdom and compassion. And the awareness and compassion, when it is combined, can inform our action, our behavior that is healthy, that is constructive, and you can call this as ethical, so ethical engagement. Now, these three kind of the dimensions are then further elaborated in what is known as 5 components. And here you can say that on the personal level, it is about attention, self-awareness, and then self-compassion. The self-compassion is a major term. Attention and self-awareness you must be quite familiar with. Self-compassion is a concept that in the West, in the Western psychology, it's a very recent, actually, since 2002 or 3, this term has become prevalent, largely due to the work of Kristen Neff, a psychologist who created a scale to measure self-compassion. But in the sea learning context, it's quite comprehensive. Self-compassion itself is quite a complex construct. There is something in the contemplative literature that His Holiness is trained in, and that is really the Indo-Tibetan spiritual treasures, if you will. There is a concept called transforming adversities into the path, and voluntarily, accepting our adversities. They are the two concepts, and that this concept, how to engage, how to relate to, how to work with our personal setbacks and tragedies or challenges and adversities. This is, in modern world, this is really an important skill that we need to have. And then of course, the engagement has to do with number of practices, activities to develop these skills, self-regulation skills. And then on the social level, interpersonal awareness, as I mentioned, compassion for others, and the relationship skills. It's one thing to have compassion, but also to provide our children the certain skills, how to resolve conflicts when it happens, whether between the children or as they grow in their community, family, and in their organizations and so forth. And then on the systems level, it has to do with the interdependence, this systems learning, systems thinking part, to understand our issues from the broader context. In that way, when we can see that we can see what His Holiness usually refers to as oneness of humanity. We can really see the whole humanity as a family. We all want to be happy, to be free from suffering, and we share the many of the fundamental aspirations that each one of us has, and then through such we can envision engaging in the larger issues, whether in one's own family or in organization or at large, at that involve the greater system, like the global warming or the many of the social problems, like the inequity, yes. So these are the issues that how we can deal with is by developing these competencies or the skills, insights that are, kind of that are addressed or the approach through this systems thinking process. Now, as I mentioned, that we have, in developing this framework, consulted many experts. So in the interest of time, I'll just need to run really fast because I'd like for our colleagues to do a little experiential experience, the opportunity to hear for us. There are many programs today. As I said, the social emotional learning itself is in many forms, many curriculum. There are character education, IB International, and anti-bullying and peace education and so forth. One would wonder why there is need for C-learning, another program. It's because the C-learning complements this with a number of new and innovative approaches to learning. It's a constructive pedagogical approach, that where the students are the contributor to the knowledge instead of just, sort of receiver, observer of the knowledge, but rather they co-create the knowledge. Compassion and care, which is missing in most of the SEL programs, what Dr. Goldman calls as an education that should be the art of the education. The compassion should be ethical engagement, attention, and so forth. Embedded trauma-informed practices. Today's children are coming from such traumatized, difficult backgrounds. Often their home experience and the various issues they struggle with, they become a real kind of impediment for them to learn at school. And the system thinking and equity focus, as I mentioned. So, as Dr. Goldman says, that this next generation SEL C-learning adds to SEL several crucial skills that are largely missing from existing programs. Or those are the programs that I mentioned. And he says that my hope is that programs like C-learning will be adopted far and wide and will help more and more students throughout their lives as they grow up and grapple with challenges not seen before in human history. As the world population grows, at the system, our communities become more complex, certainly there will be much more problems, and that without these skills, the inner skills, I think that the future generation would be really at lost. So C-learning itself is, as I said, there is a framework in the companion, 3 levels of curricula, the eldest elementary, late elementary, and middle school. Actually, high school has just been finished, so we have this. These are all age appropriately developed. Developmental psychologists are involved, and each level that has 7 chapters, and the final capstone project. Now, it was launched in Delhi by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2019 with over 1,000 educators, policymakers from 37 countries. Now, the C-learning is engaged by educators in many countries, 146 countries have engaged sea learning. 568 have completed Facilitator 1, which is teacher training. Those are or have gone through the 9 months of training to how to teach, and then some of them are here, right here, on the panel here, and these facilitators come from 59 countries actually, and to this day, about 250,000 teachers have engaged sea learning. We estimate about over 6 million children have accessed sea learning, and there are, it is an international. We have many places where we are doing research. These are some of the countries you can see here, and we do work with partners, affiliates. About 50 affiliates are around in about 50 or so countries that we have, and just to be kind of punctual with time, let me just share just a couple of anecdotes from a student, a teacher, and an administrator. So from India, or from sea learning, a student from Atlanta, she says that sea learning greatly benefited my academic achievement, which is very important. Many parents have concern in introducing sea learning because they think that the sea learning might take time away from their learning, math and other subjects, which are really important. But the important thing is that sea learning, the student points out that it benefited his academic achievement because of the variety of activities and lessons. I was able to manage my stress effectively and improve my attentiveness in class. Additionally, I gained so much compassion for myself, and this compassion gave me the motivation to work because I genuinely wanted to see myself succeed. And then, a teacher says that sea learning education is really what we need. And an administrator from Tulua, you can see that how, they see that when sea learning is introduced quite widely in one city, it has been introduced in all public schools in Tulua, and that they are seeing the change not only in individual students or individual schools, but at a communal level. So these are really encouraging for. Of course, sea learning, as I mentioned, that it is very kind of student-focused learning. A particular kind of format is, as you see on the screen, starting with check-in and settling. It follows this pedagogical model, knowledge that you receive from the teachers or the books. You really go through this reflective, critical thinking process to make this your own personal knowledge. And then through reflective practices and further journaling and so forth, making it more embodied so that the skills that the children need or we need, it becomes something that is embodied. So in the real life situation, it's not like there's something somebody needs to think how to act, but because of this dispositions and the skills that are embodied, one would naturally, respond to the situations in a healthy, constructive way. Now, in this chapter that you said, the second chapter was on building resiliency. This is an important, and this is the activity our colleagues here will lead in a minute or so. But I just want to say that resiliency, this particular activity that we introduce to the students to tap into one's resiliency is a very, very important skill because, in America, they said that up to 90% of the people have challenges or have encountered some form of trauma. Not necessarily major trauma, but some form of trauma. When you go through trauma, it changes your own physiology, nervous system, and the stress levels. Or sometimes, if the challenges are so constant, it can make us very helpless and hopeless, leading to kind of depression and so forth. Of course, we human beings have these bodies and mind very resilient. Actually, we do, weather many ups and downs. If we are in this zone or the range called the resilience, of course, some bumps there, but our body and mind remain quite resilient. When you are resilient, you are able to respond to the usual setbacks quite effectively. But at times, if we encounter certain stressful events or the traumatic experiences, particularly if they happen quite often, or sometimes if it is a very major traumatic event that we encounter, our nervous system can be affected in such a way that either leading to this sort of our system in this high zone, where if we remain stuck there, we feel panic and edgy and irritated, anxious, and quite, at times it can be quite angry or the violent feelings. But other times, if you do get bumped low and get stuck in this low zone, then that the experience is that where you feel sort of the fatigue, the depressed, numb, with no energy, and either one of these two zones, if we are stuck, we don't flourish. Physically, we don't feel well. Emotionally, we don't feel well. And cognitively, we don't function better. We don't make the right decision and so forth. So how do we help children build that resiliency? And one of the things that you can teach the children or ourselves as adults, also to self-regulate. Usually we get regulated by others, our parents and so forth, or the teachers and others. But we need to learn self-regulation strategies. One of them is what is called resourcing. That is to say that if we can have access to a moment when we actually felt safe and comforted, for example, being with one's parents or grandparents or spouse, maybe a wonderful friend, that, or a pet, where you really felt safe and comforted, or being in nature, seeing a beautiful sunset or lake, or taking a walk in the woods, or even engage in some kind of activity, playing music and like that. If we, or if you are a very religious person, you may have certain religious source that you can turn to in the moments of distress and difficulties. The idea here is that if we learn to access these moments, by just simply recalling these moments, bringing to the mind, can help our nervous system, come to this more resilient place, more regulated place. So our bodies and mind can be more regulated. We can learn to do this and to access in everyday life, wherever, whenever we need it. If we can do that, then in life there will be ups and downs, but we will be equipped with these inner tools to regulate our bodies and minds, and to bring ourselves to a more resilient place where we can make better decisions, where we can feel better, where we can be healthier. And our effort is, as Tenzin Sewo mentioned, supported by the Gandhi Photo Foundation of His Holiness, Alicia Bulgari, Kruger Foundation, Pamela and Piero Media, Ishikolo Foundation, and other individuals, and we do have the the links here if you know if you like to access in English, but otherwise there is EduS here in Italy itself. They can mention, and with this, I would like for my colleagues here to just introduce to us this activity briefly. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting us, first of all. In the short period of time that we're taking, we will present one of the activities that are part of the sea learning programs dealing with building resilience, especially working on self-regulation skills. I hand over to Eleonora because we are out of time. This is a practice that should take longer, but we can give you just a taste of this experience. So let's take a moment to do some internal or interior reflection. So let's take a comfortable position with the back straight, but not tense. If you want, you can close your eyes or lower the gaze so that you can go inside. And let's start feeling the sensations from our body. Letting go the words that we have heard and coming in contact with the bodily sensations that we have from the feet, the warmth of the body, the feelings and sensations from the hands that you may have lying in your lap or somewhere else. Let's try and feel the sensations coming from sitting right here, right now. The sensations coming from gravity that keeps us seated, supported, together with the floor, under the feet. So we feel that this contact and these feelings are somehow feelings that lead us to feel that we can release all the tensions that we have accumulated during the day, trying to relax any tension in the neck, in the shoulders, letting go the weight of this beautiful but intense day of listening, focusing now on the bodily sensations that we perceive in this moment. Maybe also observing your thoughts, your feelings, emotions. But the emotions are there and we are focused on them. The sensations of support by the floor, support given by the chair. Maybe we also feel the breath when we breathe in and breathe out, coming in and going out. And creating a space for listening. And in this space, we can bring to mind someone or something that makes us feel at ease. A dear one, a beloved person, a friend, or maybe a pet, or a place, a special place for us. A place that makes us happy, like going to the seaside, or when we take a beautiful walk in a forest, or when we walk in the mountains. and let's see what comes up in the space of our mind, someone or something that makes us feel at ease, that gives rise to a smile on our face that makes us feel good, safe, protected. Or it could be a color or something that does not exist, an imaginary space. And let's see if we can capture this image that arose inside, grasping the details. If it's a person, his or her expressions, the moments spent together, his or her smile, or if it is a place, grasping and focusing on the details of a place, the smells, the temperature. Feeling now the bodily sensations that we feel when bringing back to our mind this inner resource that we have. Feeling how we feel, in which part of the body we feel it. And if we cannot come up with an image or a resource, we can always come back to this sensation of the body being supported, the bodily sensations that are there. The contact of your feet with the ground, the contact with the chair. And this inner image is the resource which is always there for us. We can recall it anytime you're going through a difficult moment. It's something personal, it's our own, which can be brought back to mind when we need to go back to this feeling of warmth, when we need to feel welcomed or feeling related or feeling safe. And then slowly let's go back to the feelings of this moment. The feelings of your body, of the feet, of the shoulders, of the face. Also the sensation of the air around us. And if we had the eyes closed, we can open up the eyes and open up ourselves to the present space, to the present moment, taking now a very deep breath. And thank you. Just 2 minutes. That's all we have. How do you feel? Just one word, if you want. Any volunteer? Well, thank you. Whatever that was. Anyone else? Sorry, I can't see you. Deep quietness. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Professor Negi. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Tenzin. Are you going back to Switzerland tonight? Thank you. You're going back to your 3 children, talking about education and family love. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Eleonora. Thank you so much. Now we have, I'm going a bit quick because we are slightly late, but we really want you to stay through the last speaker. Let me invite Debbie Carrani, Debbie La, to come on stage. As the board of the Italian Buddhist Union, we really have this last presentation dear at heart, and I'm happy that Debbie accepted a challenge for her, that is speaking in public. Very often, people who do a lot don't say much. They don't advertise for what they do. I really feel honored to sit here next to you because I know how much you do. I know how committed you are. I saw it from the outside. I never got my hands into it, which means touching ill people, touching the poverty of Tibetan villages, the situation of the elderly, of the poor, of burnt people. The work you have done so far has been incredible. It would take me hours to introduce you properly. What you have done is incredible, but I will hand over to you. I'm really happy that this meeting ends with your testimony. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, I feel shy. I have to talk after all these wonderful speakers, and I feel humbled. We heard important and enriching presentations from them. First of all, let me tell you that I'm honored to sit here in front of Jetsun, Pema, with Angela and others. Of course, she's been one of my sources of inspiration, and I'd like to thank Filippo as a great friend, but the whole of the Italian Buddhist Union, which has become a family to me, a family who took me at a very hard time during COVID. For those of you who do not know me, there are so many friends here, and I'm very happy to see friendly faces supporting me. But anyway, I started when I was 18, so 37 years ago. I went to India. Here we have Carmen Leccardi. My spiritual godmother, and I need to thank her especially because without her, I wouldn't have a Tibetan world in me. Whereas today, I feel like saying that I look like an Indian. I'm half Italian, half English, but my heart is entirely Tibetan. I was accepted by this extraordinary family, which is the Tibetan World in Exile, in the refugee camps in India, where I went during my second trip to India. The first one was in Dharamsala, where I met extraordinary people such as Ani Kuchitumala or many other people who opened the way, opened the path for me towards the Tibetan world. I was 18 years old. I was rebel, I was adventurous and also a bit crazy. And the Tibetan world offered me a new path. It addressed me towards my heart. It took me back to my center. And I owe the biggest thanks to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who inspired me and protected me across my evolution, always guiding me and giving me the direction. And all the Tibetans sitting here are friends. Some of them were my first sponsored children or given up for adoption, for remote adoption. Thank you, because I see my whole life before my eyes. So thank you all for this time together. I'm here to share a story, which is the story of a young lady who left Italy to go to India without money, actually. But I immediately learned to ask for money because I understood that that was my motive to go back to the camps where they needed everything. So the first thing I thought of, I didn't know the associations or a project, or I didn't know anything. But after a dream that I had in Sera, because I spent the first 22 years of my life with Tibetan monks in Sera, in that dream I saw all these children tearing my clothes. The next day I asked Chorisa Rinpoche in Serame to take me and meet the poorest people in the camp, and he took me to camp number 3 in Luxus Dubling and camp 7 of Tibetan Niklasen. And I remember I took pictures. Of course, I used a basic camera with films, and I took horrible pictures. Maybe you can show some of the pictures showing the early Tibetan camps, the first Berakupas and Tibetan Likarsen in 1961 and 69. These are the pictures that I took back at that time. And then in recent times, these are still homes and buildings that are still there in refugees camps. And then we're going to see the people living here. I took the pictures and I took them back to Italy, and I asked my friends to help these children as a scholarship. So everything started from education without even knowing what I would do. I started from the idea of educating children. These are homes or buildings that we are trying to renovate now. Elderly and families live there. Some of them have babies. This is an elderly woman. To me, the elderly were the real treasure of Tibet. They embody the wealth of Tibet with their stories. So it started from the elderly, in addition to the adoption of children with scholarships, because the elderly wanted to share their stories with me. The problem is that I speak English, it's my native language, but I couldn't speak a word of Tibetan. But my desire was so strong, but I didn't have time to study Tibetan because I needed to do things. And so my desire was to communicate with them. And so at some point I started speaking Tibetan. Of course, it's not refined Tibetan. I make grammar mistakes, but I could understand what they were telling me. And that to me meant a huge opening. It was like a river that started running. And in fact, the first project that His Holiness asked me to develop was to close a chicken farm in Vailakup to open up a house for the elderly. And that was the first project that I ended up following. And thanks to an extraordinary person who passed away 2 years ago, who gave me all the money that I needed, because the mother who lived in Italy was for many years in a bed in an elderly home. She decided to give me all the money that was necessary to build these elderly homes, which house more than 40 elderly today. Then I put myself to the service of these people. Today I feel I'm just an instrument that has sort of delivered like a bridge. I ended up being a bridge for the people living there, but also people living here, for all the people who could get to know the Tibetan people through remote adoptions and through the possibility to help these elderly people and to participate in projects. And the second project, in addition to all the elderly people that you see here, and I have such a close bond, a strong bond with them. I know each of them, I know them by name. And the Dalai Lama came personally to inaugurate this elderly home in 1995. And then from here, we move on to children. to remote adoptions of children monks, and then we moved to the delivery room. That was another extraordinary project. On that year, I met Vimala, the association that after 14 years of working alone, I was a freelancer, although I was a member of the Italiana Tibet Association. I was the youngest, but then Giulietta came along and she became the youngest. So together with them, who guided me, of course, for many, many things. So I have my godmothers and godfathers like Piero and so on. They are all great friends who have always supported me, because working by myself was not easy for me. I love sharing, and that's why I'm sharing this moment with you. And now I have UBI, which has become my large family. This delivery room was the time when Vimala, these two ladies who were much older than me, one is the same age as my mother, with whom I started working. So the Associazione Vimala started up from a leprosy center that we are still working with today, and now works with Tibetan camps. We have 45 Tibetan camps in Bhutan, India, and other places. So the Home Department is responsible for them. The Home Department deals with all refugee camps. What you see here is the delivery room in the middle and two hospitals, one for tuberculosis and the other one is a health center from Dikilin in Dehradun in northern England, northern India. So healthcare was one of my priorities before education, although adoptions were already part of education, but healthcare was crucial because Tibetans have suffered from severe diseases such as tuberculosis, which unfortunately devastated Tibetan refugee camps. Many people died. And one of the main requests was to have this isolation TB ward to avoid contagions among family members because it's highly contagious. And then we had many, many cases of hepatitis. So healthcare to us has always been a top priority. Without healthcare, you cannot study, you cannot go to school, you cannot get to secular ethics or seal learning. So that was the basis. His Holiness, especially in the delivery room, I remember during one of my lucky meetings, he was always very happy because every time I started a project, I asked His Holiness to give me a blessing. And His Holiness asked me, is the delivery room going to be open to Indians as well? And I understood immediately that there was an inherent gratitude towards the Indian population and government. He always asked me to develop projects that were also to be made available to Indians, to the adjacent areas, to the refugee camps. Here you can see the security conditions in refugee camps. This is also very important because besides dealing with healthcare, we also deal with well-being, as you can see from the pictures, which are not too good, but they give you an idea of how much Ethernet is used. It's a big problem in refugee camps. In the last 10 years, with Loseng Senge and with the others, Wanchala, who was the health minister, to resolve this problem. At that time, we met. I met Filippo and UBI in Mugan, and he asked me what the major problems in the camps were. And I said, you know, right in the hospital, we have the staff quarters in Mungut, where people live surrounded by Ethernet, which is 40 years old. And you could see the asbestos powder through the sun rays. So children aged 4 or 5 would live there with their families. It was a huge battle that I waged, and it resulted into the first project that UBI sponsored for us. So we built new staff quarters, so thank you again to UBI. New staff quarters were built where doctors and nurses working for the Munghet hospital can live. Now, water tanks are dry today. In Balakupen in southern India, it hasn't rained for 4 years almost. The monsoons are no longer what they used to be. So one of the main requirements today in refugees camps is water. We need to look for water. Very often we find it's very expensive. The fundraising that we do is from €1 to whatever you can offer. So donations and contributions are fundamental because all the money, and I mean all the money, we are all volunteers, are used for these projects. So this part of healthcare is what allows us to create a stronger people. Stronger people can study and live a different future. Here you can see nurseries or schools. The midday meals was another request by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, to take care of nutrition for these children from kindergarten to primary and secondary schools. We offer the midday meal for all children. The hope of education, as Pema already said, or Piero said, and the other speakers also said, it's fundamental. In refugee camps, today, children are free. The real and true Tibet, not because Tibet is not, but with the Chinese occupation, there are huge problems. These children instead are free, and they experience this freedom in what they learn also. The true key to interpreting this freedom is education. Education makes us strong. As Mark said, the vision. I never thought in the past 37 years, I never thought that Tibet would not become free again. And I continue to believe so until my last breath. And I'm sure of that. I saw them grow up. I saw them evolve with the extraordinary guidance of His Holiness. But not just that. We have wonderful examples. These Tibetan women were here are two examples, and I'd like to thank the Tibetan Women Association and all the Tibetan women who did a wonderful job as mothers, as friends, and as supporters of the Tibetan cause, embodying it in 1,000 manners. I can share a story that may sound terrible, but in the end it was one of those miracles that sometimes happen in refugee camps. In the delivery room where I saw some 60 plus children come to life, not this one, but the one before was one of the kids that I held in my hands, and I watched them for the first time. So in that room, a woman who had just run away from Tibet came in. I remember it was more or less in 2007. She came for an examination. In Tibet, she was forced by putting acids in the uterus, and she was 6 months pregnant. When she told us her story, I was with my 2 midwives and another 2 nurses, and we were deeply touched. She was talking about her disaster. She was dying of sepsis because after this forced abortion, she had walked through the Himalayas until Dharamsala to then go to Bailakupur. The midwife sent Zo out and examined her, and with the astonishment and the, all the feelings that I can feel today, she was pregnant after her uterus was devastated by acid. This is one of the miracles that happen. They happen because there is that strength, that dignity, which is only to be found among Tibetan women, which is what I met, which is what I experienced with my friends, with all these people that I have related with over the years. And since we were talking about little miracles, this was a very serious case, a heart case. This was a young girl, 1.5 months old. She was dying. Her weight was 900 grams. She had been delivered by a very poor mother who didn't. She was born of a very poor mother. She didn't know how to be a mother. She could not feed this baby. There were many other problems. This little girl was saved only because the representative of the camp, together with the coordinator for the hospital, the colleague from the Baila Coupe was there, and she came to ask for money. I didn't have any money left, because when I went to India, I would bring with me large amounts, which I distributed in various projects, in adoptions, and I just had €300 left, which I needed for the rest of my trip, because I was going to go north. And I remember, without hesitating, I took the money and I gave it to them, and then I said, when I get to Delhi, I have Indian friends and they will help me. If you move on, after 6 months, this girl looked like this, as you can see on the slide. So that was another miracle. That's one of those achievements that, maybe they foster your motivation. That's why after 37 years, I'm still here despite COVID, which destroyed us as an association, because, of course, people would no longer give everything that they gave until then. But then, when angels come to you, they come from nowhere. It was important for me to come to the Italian Buddhist Union. This word impressed me so much. I have a million things to say, but we're all tired. I was very excited and very moved. But I have one word that I need to say. It's union.
So this union is, for me, the word that unites us all. I think it's been said already, but a piece of Tibet is something that is inside the heart of all of us, together with the compassion that we should turn towards ourselves first, and then towards others. That's what Geshe Negi was saying. His Holiness has always spoken about love and compassion. Sometimes we don't get what this is all about. Inside of the refugee camps, I have learned this. And I have to thank the Tibetan people. They thank me all the time because I help them, but it's not true. It's the other way around. They help us. They give us the possibility of being generous, of feeling like good people, like useful people, and really it is through their suffering, and it is in their eyes, in the folds of their face, of the face of the old people, that we learn what it means to be serving a cause. Helping these children and these young people and education is the key to freedom. It's the absolute key to freedom of emotions, to freedom of mind, to freedom in action. today, young Tibetans who cannot, and I'm not talking about young Tibetans who are here, mothers and fathers, and also mothers and fathers who are listening. Please, you have to teach your language to your children, no matter where you are, in America, in Italy, in Germany. You have to speak your language to your children, because you are going to really convey the Tibetan spirit. One of the greatest problems in refugee camps today, which fundamentally worries the Central Tibet administration, is the decrease in birth. When I first got to refugee camps, families had 7, 8 children. Now they have about 2. And the Tibetan government in exile promoted the possibility to help people who decide to have a 3rd or 4th child by paying for their studies and creating the conditions for these children to be able to study. So, and all of this is interconnected. Everything that we live, that we experience through this reality, we experience this in our lives. And until we want to be able to understand this, we want to be able to advance. So I think it's fundamental to feel a bit Tibetan. The message of the union, from the union of these friendships, of these moments. Like Geshe said, these things don't finish after 2 days. They must continue. They must continue in our head and in our heart to really become a real help and a service for ourselves and for mankind. I would like to leave you now because I can feel your tiredness. I said what I wanted to say. I think I've been quite good because my voice wasn't shaking. So thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope I have been brief, and I hope I sent the message I wanted to send. And you are all invited to know the refugee camps. There is a possibility to come and see them, to live them, and I am there for you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Debbie. So I'd like to conclude with a short reflection. A lot of the people who are close to Tibet and the Tibetan cause are close to the culture, the Buddhist teachings. And sometimes I think when Buddha realized the first noble truth of suffering, there was no space for pessimism at that time, was there? If he had had some pessimism, we wouldn't be here. So you, Debbie, are an example of never give up, never pessimism, waking up, working every day. And this is also the commitment of UB, of the Italian Buddhist Union, of the directive board, 7 people who are working to do as much as we can and have an impact on different forms of suffering. There is no space for pessimism. And also, we must not fall into excessive optimism because we have to work very hard. There's a lot to do. And the Italian Buddhist Union at the time can help financially because there are people who help us to donate. Donate is the right word because a lot of people are giving part of their tax bill to the Italian Buddhist Union, and 6 Italians out of 10 don't even decide where to give this percentage of the tax. And, I'm talking about many religions. You have the possibility to devote part of your tax bill to some organizations, and some people don't even bother doing it, and it doesn't cost them anything. So this gesture that you do helps healing so much suffering. So once again, I would like to appeal to your help, to your commitment, and our commitment is to do projects not only with Buddhism. Suffering doesn't have a color or a religion. Suffering happens in all religions, in all countries, in all people. And if you follow the Buddhist teachings, you know what I'm talking about. So thank you so much, Debbie. I think your experience is a wonderful example of what it means, compassion in action. So I would like to thank everyone again. Obviously, we are going to thank again Fondazione Feltrinelli. They didn't only give the space to us, because kindness has very many expressions. So thank you so much for supporting us, for giving us this space to support this event, which has not been an easy event. It took some courage to give us some space, and we founded this courage, this sensitiveness. So thank you so much. I would like to thank the organization that allowed this event to happen. So I'm feeling a little bit tired myself, so I'd like to thank ICT, International Campaign of Tibet, for all the work they have done over the past few years. We have been, we are, and we will be close to you in everything that you do. I wish to thank the Gaden Podram Foundation, Tenzin, the Italy-Tibet Association, and all the extraordinary people who took part in this adventure. I wish to thank the Tibetan community that has been here. Also, this event was possible also thanks to the work and suggestions and continuous support and phone calls and conversations with different people. But I would like to particularly mention Tenzin for his kindness and humanity and support in this wonderful event. Thank you so much. And then, of course, Jetsun, Pema. I think I'm going to cry now. So I stop because I feel very emotional. I stop. Imagine what I could say to Jetsun, Pema, the emotion that moves me in this moment. I would like to thank all my friends from Boiler for the fantastic help on their beautiful touch that they put in all the graphics, everything that you see. There is their experience, their heart, their professionalism. I would like to thank Silvia, who has left, and her team, Valentina, all the kids that gave such a big hand to this organization. Everyone worked so hard over the last few weeks. A big thought of my friends Isabella Ranieri and Barbara, who have been translating this event. Oh, thank you, Filippo. And Max, who helped subtitling all the video contributions. And thanks to all of you who have been with us today up to the end. Let's not give up. Let's not give up. We need to be a network. We need to be together. And we can do so much. We will do so much. And it doesn't matter what happens. We'll start getting involved from tomorrow morning. Thank you. Thank you so much.